Hi, my name is Yishis, and I play a thief on the Blackgate server. Today I'm bringing you the 6th installment of my Outnumbered commentary videos. I have now returned to the Burst Dagger spec of my previous videos, as revealed has been decreased to 3 seconds and the fluidity is restored. Initially, I find myself being chased by a group of Jade Quarry, so I kite them across the water and then quickly turn on them, steal into a squishy staff Elementalist, and get a quick backstab followed by Heartseeker to take her down and get a successful stomp before the rest of her group can arrive. I then switch to the Necromancer and get quick damage into her as the Warrior and Mesmer approach. I evade and enter into a Dagger Storm in order to gain stability and cripple the enemies to suppress most of their initial burst. By evading out of the Dagger Storm, I break it and then quickly stealth with a heal. This throws the enemies off on my positioning, and I'm able to cleanly reopen on the Necromancer without the other enemies noticing in time. I get strong damage into the Necromancer and stealth again to completely avoid the Warrior's Bull's Charge, which throws her positioning off, and I'm able to complete damage on the Necromancer and get a stomp off while in stealth. Knowing that I'm very low on health from the Necromancer's wells, I immediately use Blinding Powder as soon as the stomp completes so that I avoid the enemy's burst. Stealing to the Mesmer, I gain all buffs, and then I'm able to open very strongly on her with quick damage. However, I take a bit too much burst from her Phantasm and get crippled, so I re-stealth to clear the cripple condition. I'm a bit too slow in reopening on her, and she teleports away. I then get crippled again by her clone, so I evade in order to gain swiftness and avoid her pull. She retreats defensively into the water, so I try to gain the kill with a Heartseeker, and I enter into a refuge in order to regain health and hope that I can get a stealth stomp on her. However, I now notice that she lived through the burst and is now kiting away, so I take a moment knowing that I have a lot of stealth from Shadow Refuge, and reapply my food buffs. I then move in to finalize the kill, but the warrior ends up getting a crippling weakness on me, so my damage is very weak. She teleports away, so I follow up with a Shadow Step of my own and complete a backstab to take her down, and succeed in a stealth stomp. I now move to Dispatch of the Warrior. I stealth up and steal up to him to backstab, however, I end up rubber banding backwards, so I use Dagger number 4 to cripple him. Noticing that he's fully running away, I stealth up and switch to my Shortbow in order to immobilize him. However, I fail to pan to my left and there's now a large group hitting me. I quickly enter into Dagger Storm in order to gain stability and cripple the enemies, then evade out of it to reserve the stability, and then Shadow Step away with my Shortbow. My low health Blinding Powder triggers, and I then use my heal in order to clear any remaining conditions on me and continue to Shadow Step away. At this point, the enemies have totally lost sight of me, and I'm able to escape. For the next fight, I find myself being chased by 2 Mesmers. I steal up to one initially and get a quick stealth, and then utilize the stolen ability to gain all buffs. I attempt to re-stealth on a clone, but hit an Aegis buff, so I have to Cloak and Dagger again. At this point, I see a Phantasm up, and I'm unsure which one it is, so I decide to wait and Cloak and Dagger it down before engaging the actual Mesmers, as I'm afraid of the damage it might put out. It's worth noting the Phantasm was only a Warden, and the whirl would not have had much of an effect, but I didn't want to take any chances. I then enter into a Dagger Storm as I see numerous projectiles that can be reflected, and I wanted to cripple the enemies. I then re-stealth and plan to engage this Mesmer, but enter into a Chaos Storm, so I retreat back. I look to reopen, but see that the enemies are a bit too far away, so I choose to re-stealth on the clone. Noticing another Phantasm appear, I again choose to Cloak and Dagger to re-stealth on it and take it out before engaging the Mesmers again. I then steal up to the other Mesmer and decide to engage her in order to throw her off. As I'm about to reopen, the Mesmer teleports away, so I'm forced to move back in and Cloak and Dagger to re-stealth. Seeing that I have travel time to reach the enemies, I use the stolen ability to gain buffs again for a stronger reopening. I get good damage into the Mesmer, but then get feared, so I Blinding Powder to again confuse them on my positioning, and push back in on the same Mesmer. I re-stealth, get a very strong hit, and follow it up with Firm Pressure to fully take her down. I manage to enter the Stomp animation before she goes into stealth, so I'm able to complete the Stomp as soon as she reappears. Switching targets to the remaining Mesmer, I know I'm right outside an enemy sentry and camp, so I know I need to dispatch of her quickly before enemies arrive. I get some strong backstabs in, and quickly take care of her. I again get into the Stomp animation before her stealth occurs, but this time her random movement was lucky, and I have to stomp one more time to finish her off. At this point, I expect more enemies may be arriving, so I quickly take care of some mobs, and then turn around to notice that a Guardian is arriving. I avoid his immobilize, and then let him blow a few weapon abilities on the mob, then steal and engage on him. I then notice that there's a warrior approaching from the left, so I evade and re-stealth. At this point, I move out of the Guardian's AoE, and attempt to cripple him. However, I make a critical error in that the Guardian had a reflection wall up, and my Dagger number 4 ends up reflecting and crippling me instead. So I decide I need to back out and wait a few moments for the cripple to disappear, and get a new perspective on the fight. As I expected, the enemies moved to revive the Mesmers that I killed, so I use this as bait to get a clean back shot on them. However, I deem that the Guardian is too tanky to take out first, so I instead switch to the Rifle Warrior and get good damage into him and cripple him. I get immobilized from the Guardian's hammer, so I re-stealth on the mob and then push back in to get another strong hit into the Warrior. At this point I have him almost down, so I steal up to him to keep pressure on him, attempt to re-stealth, but I take a knockback from his rifle. So I re-stealth with Blinding Powder, get another strong backstab, and knock him down. However, I make a huge mistake and walk right into the Guardian's hammer and get the full knockback, so I have to re-stealth and let the Warrior be revived. However, I know the Warrior is still my best target as he's extremely squishy, so I get good damage on him again and take him down. I stealth up, take an immobilize from the Guardian, but this isn't enough to stop me from getting a successful stomp on the Warrior. I stealth up on the Guardian and decide that I'm going to need to again push through his tankiness and find a good opening. He puts up his reflection wall, but I use the Warrior ability, which doesn't have a projectile component, so I'm able to put damage into him. He then puts down his hammer ring, so I stay out of it and switch to my Shortbow to keep pressure on him and poison him in order to lessen the effectiveness of his heal. With the ring gone, I wait to switch back to my daggers and re-stealth in order to get a reopening on this Guardian. I steal up to him, miss the backstab, but I now have the Daze ability, which I use against him in order to keep damage pressure on him, and he's unable to react as he's dazed. The stolen ability from the Guardian, if you're able to get it off, is very effective at shutting down the Guardian's own survivability abilities, as they're dazed and unable to react with most of their survival skills. I finish off with a stomp and put some cool animation effects in just for the hell of it. For the next fight, I engage 2 max level thieves in the same guild. Approaching from the side, I'm able to get the jump on them, so I steal up to the first thief, get a cloak and dagger followed by a strong backstab, and already have him almost down. The second thief goes into a dagger storm, but I'm able to just evade out of it and re-stealth to avoid most of the damage. The Asura thief then gets a lucky hit on me, and the second thief also opens, so I shadow step away and dagger storm in order to gain distance from them and cripple them so they have a hard time keeping up with me. When they catch me, I immediately shadow step back and attempt to re-stealth. However, I was immune as my low health Blinding Powder had already triggered, so I re-stealth with my own Blinding Powder and then open on the other thief that had approached me. The thief shadow steps back, and both thieves are now in Shadow Refuge to reset themselves. I use the fact that there's a pack of mobs around me as my own stealth cover, waiting for the enemies to re-engage on me. I see that both thieves are now on the hill above me using black powder to stay in stealth, so I continue to use the mobs to stay in stealth and force the enemies to re-engage on me in this area. One thief opens and fails his backstab on the mob, and I find the second thief out in the open, so I quickly re-stealth with a cloak and dagger and get another good backstab in. To confuse the enemies on my positioning, I immediately steal to a mob and use the stolen ability to re-stealth and then Heartseeker into the thief to get him down. I then drop a Shadow Refuge to go for a safe stomp, take a daze from the remaining thief's out of stealth sword ability, but do get a successful stomp, and then immediately reopen on the remaining thief. I can tell at this point I have the thief panicked as he shadow steps away, so I Heartseeker up for good damage. He shadow steps back, so I switch to my Shortbow and finalize with a few quick arrow shots. I drop a poison and put final damage pressure to fully dispatch of the thief. The thief attempts to invite me to a group, but do note that I don't normally accept group invites from enemies, as I don't usually care for the conversation that can occur. For the next fight, I approach 3 enemies debating about taking a camp, and I decide I'm going to give them the upper hand to engage me, so I stop to pick some strawberries. I see the enemies enter stealth, so I turn around and move backwards, preparing for them to engage. The engineer engages first, and I take an immobilize from him, but I get a cloak and dagger off and enter stealth. I then use Thieves Guild to even the odds and give the enemies some different targets to waste their abilities on. One of my thieves pulls the engineer to knock him down, so I use this as an opportunity to engage with another backstab. I then re-stealth and see that the engineer has knocked himself away from his friends, so I use this as an opportunity to get fast damage into him before the other enemies can react. His Elixir S on low health goes off, and he then uses his own Elixir S to prevent me from finalizing the kill. I re-stealth one more time and see that I can still finalize the damage on him, so I move in and finish him off. I now Shadow Refuge to get the stomp and position myself so that if the Mesmer were to use his Greatsword knockback, I hopefully would not be knocked out of stealth. The stomp is successful, and I already get very strong damage into the Ranger. At this point, the Mesmer evades backwards and knocks himself off the ledge and is going to completely run away, and I finalize the stomp on the Ranger. I move out to try to find the Mesmer, but he's already completely gone. For the next fight, I take on several enemies outside of an enemy camp. I immediately steal in and get a stealth off on this Staff Elementalist, expecting that she's probably fairly squishy. I miss my next cloak and dagger, but do manage to avoid her stun field, and re-stealth on the sentry while I wait for her to move out of that field. As I re-engage on her again, I notice a Necromancer coming into the fight as well. I move forward to avoid the sentry's immobilize, and then continue to put pressure on the Elementalist. She goes into her mist form, but I Heartseeker one more time, timing it such that it hits as soon as the mist form ends. I go for a stomp, but she of course misforms in her downstate, so I stealth one more time and get a successful stomp on her. Notice that my blind on stealth had also blinded the sentry so that his immobilize missed me. I put strong and quick pressure into the Necromancer, take one blind from him that causes me to miss my Cloak and Dagger, but I blinding powder and get a finishing backstab to take him down and get a successful stomp. I then proceed to take out the sentry and only several minutes later have more enemies re-engage. I open initially on a warrior with a legendary hammer, get a nice backstab into him, but find that he's rather tanky. I use my stolen ability against him, but still am unable to break through most of his health. An engineer with pistols then engages from behind, and I decide he's likely going to be the easier target. I move into the closer target, the warrior, in order to gain a stealth, and then push in to unexpectedly backstab the engineer. At this point, he immediately blocks with a shield, and then uses the shield knockback, so I re-stealth with blinding powder, and then push in to apply additional pressure. I mistime my Cloak and Dagger on the warrior by a split second, and have to recover by using Dagger Storm in order to reflect the engineer's pistol abilities back at himself. He then uses his elixir gun number 4 and knocks himself off the cliff, so I follow him down in stealth, and then shadow step in to get a strong backstab and fully take him out. My blind on stealth blinds the enemy mobs so they can't knock me down, and I succeed in the stomp. I now move back up the ledge expecting the warrior to still be there. He notices me out of stealth and jumps down to re-engage with his rifle, so I evade and then steal up to him, attempt to re-stealth, but he knocks me back with his rifle, so I immediately use the stolen ability to reflect all of his projectiles back at him. I turn and re-stealth on one of the mobs, and then Heartseeker up to keep damage pressure on the warrior. I use my Dagger number 4 to cripple him, and then re-stealth on a critter, then get a nice backstab into the warrior, and re-stealth one more time. My goal when fighting a tanky target like this is to continue to apply mass pressure while staying very mobile and continually confusing the enemy on my position. I re-stealth with blinding powder, and then again move in and Cloak and Dagger and open again on him, keeping the mobility upper hand on him so that I can keep heavy pressure on him. He tries to use his hammer knockdown, but I've blinded him by going into stealth, and it fails. There's now a staff elementalist that has entered the fight as well, but I have the warrior low enough that I want to make sure I take him out while he's under pressure. His low health Endure Pain triggers, but I continue to stay on him, stealth one more time, and when I see that Endure Pain falls, I backstab to finish him off. He knocks me down with his downed ability, but I re-stealth one more time and finalize the kill. I now switch and focus my attention on the Elementalist. I stealth on her pet, and then get a strong backstab in as she's attempting to cast Meteor Shower. I then put extreme damage into her using the stolen ability from the warrior, and take her down. However, she's got a lot of AoE going on, and so I need to pull out a little bit, drop a Shadow Refuge to gain enough health regen, and then move in to finalize the stomp on her. For the next fight, I find myself engaging a Mesmer with several other enemies adding in soon after. Initially, I engage the Mesmer by stealing up to him and gaining stealth, and then quickly view around me to see what other enemies might engage. I deem that it's safe enough to engage the Mesmer, so I get a backstab in, he immediately stealths, I use the buffs that I stole from him, and then re-stealth on the Dolyak passing by. At this point, he's waiting in a Chaos Storm, and I don't want to enter that, so I wait for that to end, and then notice that there's a thief nearby, so I divert my attention, re-stealth, and open on the thief. I get very strong damage into him, go into a Dagger Storm. The Mesmer then moves in with sword number 3 and 2 in order to immobilize me and burst, so I shadow step away and back and use Dagger Storm to apply damage. I re-stealth on the mob and decide to get back on the Mesmer as I'm unsure where the thief has gone to. I try to backstab the Mesmer, but hit a clone. He then does a good job of evading with his staff ability and then an evade, and I get blinded, which prevents my Cloak and Dagger, so I heal in order to re-stealth. He then stealths up inside a Chaos Storm. I try to re-stealth on a clone, but again hit an Aegis. I do manage to get a second Cloak and Dagger off, and notice that he has a Phantasm that could do a lot of damage, so I again Cloak and Dagger to take that out, and now deem that it's safe to reopen fully on the Mesmer. However, I now notice that the thief has returned and is attempting to Heartseeker me. I Cloak and Dagger to stealth, and his Heartseekers go right through me. He then Dagger Storms, and I use his locked animation in order to pump damage into him and get him downed. I then use a Refuge in order to successfully stomp him. There's now a Staff Elementalist that has entered the fight and dropped a Meteor Shower, and one other enemy that enters and then runs away. I decide that the Staff Elementalist is likely going to be fairly squishy, and I can drop him quickly. I get a very strong backstab and take him down already. I move in, stealth up, and go for a stomp. The Mesmer shatters on me, but it's not enough damage, and I'm able to get the stomp off right as the enemy's downed mist form completes. The Mesmer now uses one of his block weapon abilities and moves to the sentry for assistance. I wait for the block to end, and then re-stealth on the Mesmer. The Mesmer continues to play evasively and re-stealths one more time, and I stealth up on another of his clones. I now see the Mesmer is left right in the open, so I steal up to him, stealth, and use the stolen ability to gain buffs, then put strong damage pressure into the Mesmer. Notice that my blind on stealth is very much shutting down the sentry so that his crowd control is not hitting me. I have the Mesmer nearly down and finalize with damage to take him out. Stealth and gain a successful stomp. At this point, I go ahead and finish off the sentry and do manage to take the sentry point. For the final fight, I end up engaging one enemy outside a camp and quickly notice there's a full group of enemies attempting to defend this camp. During this fight, I'll attempt to move in and fully assassinate all enemies defending the camp. I steal into this ranger and get strong damage. He attempts to cripple me with a trap, but I have him blinded from going into stealth, so the trap fails. I put heavy damage in to take him down, and then wait to re-stealth and gain a successful stomp. As I'm doing this, I'm panning around and notice the rest of the enemies defending the camp. I decide I'm going to use the ranger's dead body as bait to lure the rest of the enemies out. Panning behind me, I notice at least one thief already jumping off to come revive the ranger, so I turn around and move back in. I switch to Shortbow just to get some initial damage off, and then get opened on by a second thief. I put off a poison field and then re-stealth with blinding powder to gain the upper hand. I get a very strong backstab into what must be a glass thief. His low health blinding powder triggers, and I use a heal to re-stealth. At this point, the second thief goes into a dagger storm, and I use his locked animation to again put strong damage in. I get another great backstab, a few auto attacks to take him very low, evade, and then fully down him with one more cloak and dagger. I use the stolen ability to gain a little bit longer stealth, and then gain a successful stomp on the thief. The other thief is very low health, and I let him escape back to his friends. At this point, I am, however, going to loop around and move in to finalize the kill on the rest of the enemies at the camp. I'm now on the side of the camp, and notice an arrow cart I can gain stealth on, and a necromancer and thief to engage. I open initially on the thief as I know he's likely the heavier damage. I get very strong damage into him, attempt a cloak and dagger, and he evades. I then take a daze, so I use blinding powder to reposition and decide to open on the necromancer just to see how squishy he is. I get some decent damage in, evade away, but decide that with all the necromancer marks that are now on the ground, I should wait and re-stealth and reopen on the enemies from the other side to confuse them on my positioning. They notice where I am, so I quickly re-stealth on the necromancer. The thief then goes Heartseeker crazy, which lets me cleanly open on the necromancer instead. At this point, I now dagger storm in order to keep damage on both enemies. The necromancer then uses all of his wells and marks, which does some heavy damage to me, so I decide it's best to shadow step out and shadow refuge in order to regain some health. However, the necromancer is extremely low. I evade into the mark on the ground so that it is evaded, and then get a backstab in to fully take out the necromancer. I try to stealth with my heal, but the necromancer gets his down fear off, so I use blinding powder instead, and then successfully get a stomp on the necromancer. The thief is now heartseekering into me again, so I re-stealth and heal, then get a backstab followed by several auto attacks, which is enough to take out this very glass-heavy thief. At this point I attempt to go for a stomp, however I don't have any shadow step abilities available, so he steps away and I decide to just finish him off with damage. And that completes the 6th installment of my Outnumbered commentary videos. Thank you all for watching. You can find my full spec and gear information in the description of the video below. Thanks again, and I hope you've enjoyed.